Hey everyone, and welcome to Adobe Live. We're coming to you live from the land of the Dharawal people here in Sydney, Australia. I'm very excited to be here back to continue our project about the topic home. We're asking creators to come on and tackle this kind of thematic brief. It's been really fun. We've had a lot of people on already, and you can check out some of those previous streams if you like. And for the first time, we're having someone come back and continue their project, which is really exciting. And I'm joined by Jeremy Lord, illustrator from Sydney, Australia. How you doing, Jeremy?
Hey, how's it going? Good to be back.
I'm good, thanks. I'm good, thanks. We were just having like all this chat before the stream, and then we realized, oh wow, it's 12 o'clock. We actually need to get this stream started. So yeah, we do get carried away with our pre-show stuff. Maybe we should turn that into some like exclusive content or something.
Yeah, behind the scenes.
Yeah, like a podcast. They're like, hey, here's our Patreon. Um, but welcome everybody. We are live, so if you have any questions or comments, or you're just checking it out, it's always great to hear from you. We're looking at the live chat here on Behance and also on YouTube. We're here for 45 minutes, so I don't want to take any more time away from Jeremy. So Jeremy, shall we take it away?
Let's.
All right.
Um,
So
so
you.
we're doing kind of like a home theme stream, as you said. I'm half French. I grew up in Paris, and so that's kind of like where I guess I've been in Sydney probably almost as long, but home is more kind of like where your memories are, where like things that like trigger these feelings of being home. And for me, that's definitely like, having a good croissant in a boulangerie in Paris or something. That's like, oh, yeah, home.
Yeah.
Or a good slice of cheese or something. So I wanted to do this kind of like pixel art, isometric cross section of like all things Paris slash France condensed into this little kind of chunk of land kind of thing, and turn that into a poster. So this is the sketch that we ended up with from the last stream. And today I'm going to get into kind of some of the basics of creating pixel art and creating isometric pixel art, and what are some of the main concerns. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about color and setting up your file, because something like this can have quite a lot of colors and can be quite intimidating to get into the color aspect. So yeah, let's get stuck straight in. So the first thing I'm going to do here is create a new document. Ordinarily, what I would have done in the past is to create a new document to just kind of like have a certain pixel size and have that set from the get-go, like know what pixel density you're working at. With something like this, I'm going to actually just do it like it's kind of hard to explain. You'll see what I'm talking about in just a sec. But first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to arrange these two to be two up vertical. And actually, in order to, I'm going to undo that. And I want this guy to be on the other side of that. I can't remember how to do this properly. Here we go. Cool. That's what I wanted to have happen. So I've got my reference on the side here. Ordinarily, what I would have done in the past is I would have just brought that sketch into my canvas here where I'm going to work.
Right.
But I'm just going to use this as a reference because there's a lot there, and sketch kind of can get a little bit kind of cranky if you kind of go into it a little bit too much. So I'm just going to work with this side by side, and then I can just kind of use that as a reference. So I'm going to zoom straight into that, and I'm going to turn on my pixel grid. So turning on the pixel grid is Command or Control apostrophe, and you get this pixel grid that appears. That's just going to help me kind of see where I'm going a little bit better. So I'm just kind of like staring at an ocean of nothingness. And you can change this pixel grid. I've got it changed to 8 by 8. And going pretty fast here, but basically you can see I've got a grid line every 8 pixels, and that's it. That's all I kind of need. So I've got 8 by 8 squares going inside of this. And the main kind of key thing you want to do when you're working with pixel art is change from the brush tool to the pencil tool, which is right under here. If you hold down on the brush tool, you'll pop up this menu and you'll get your pencil tool going. And what that is basically is a very like chunky pixelated version of your brush. with no kind of aliasing or smooth edges, which is exactly what we want for pixel art. So yay.
Nice.
And we're going to knock that back down to 1 pixel. So literally going to be drawing with 1 pixel. Right?
Yeah.
So you can see here that my square is in fact 8 pixels by 8 pixels. And I can kind of like see where my pixels are going to be going with this grid, which if I didn't have, it's kind of hard to know like, oh, I want to put a pixel like 2 away from here, but it's going to snap to like weird places. So having that pixel grid is quite helpful to have on. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is I'm going to do the same thing to the eraser, except the eraser lives in a slightly different thing. If you hold down the eraser, you won't see like a pencil eraser tool kind of equivalent. Where that lives is actually up here in the mode menu. You'll see brush, pencil, or block. We're going to go with pencil. So I'm changing my eraser and my brush to pixel. And that's going to be the basis of what I'm doing. So if I'm drawing like this, I've got a bunch of pixels in there. And my eraser is also going to take out a single pixel at a time. Good to go. So I can probably just start to get going at this stage already and see where we're going to be kind of working on. And what I would have normally done in the past, which I was talking about, is like change pick a certain pixel size and pick a kind of a pixel density. But for something this detailed, actually, it's probably going to be easier for me to kind of work to this A4 format, which is what I've got here. Right? If I zoom out, you can see this like huge thing, which is going to be way too big for pixel art, but that doesn't matter. More is better. I can always crop it out. But what I want to do is I want to pick something that's going to be quite small. So like these little kind of like cafe tables or the railing on this bridge, or like, what's the smallest thing I'm going to have to do? I'm going to start with that. And then that will give me kind of my like yardstick for everything else. And everything will be based on that.
Right.
Which means I won't have this problem. Like, for instance, if I decide like, all right, I'm going to work to like I don't know, let's say like a 3 pixel kind of thing, I might run into an issue where if I have the railing, it's going to look like this, right? I need a space in between the railing, and like this, that's not really going to cut it.
Yeah.
So it's going to avoid later issues for me if I just start with the smallest, like trickiest thing to do, which like I think that's probably the best way to put it in pixel art, is like the smaller things are the hardest things to express with a single pixel.
Yeah. That's really cool. Is that always like been your approach to pixel art, or is that something that you've kind of discovered as you've gone?
That's something that I've discovered as I've gone, and I think it's definitely applicable to something like this, whereby it's like I said, it's quite detailed, and so it needs to be like let's say, all right, let's kind of give you kind of a concrete example of this, right? Let's say I'm drawing a face, and it's a very kind of like 8-bit kind of chunky face, and let's say I've got like a little bit of a chin in there, and I want to put like a nose in, and I want to kind of go up and draw the rest of all of that, and like maybe there's like an ear over here.
So you're going to give it a mullet?
Yeah, I could give it a mullet actually. But like, all right, so the nose is a single pixel, and like this reads okay, but like if I did an eye, for instance, like the eye and the ear are kind of like difficult to kind of make out a little bit of a difference. I could use color to do that. That's probably a little bit better, but that's my scale now kind of set. I can't go any smaller than that if I'm trying to do this, right? If I'm trying to make it a little bit more cartoony and add a reflection in the eye, then I'm going to need to do something like this, where it's like, I need a little bit more information in here, so I'm going to need to make the eye bigger and then put like a reflection in it. And then again, as you zoom out, like you'll see this kind of thing happen a little bit more. But that's what you're going for, right? This idea that in like pixel art, the smallest things are the things that are the most challenging to draw, because all you have is a pixel in some cases. And the nose reads fine. The eye is a little bit harder, but there you go.
Cool. I like that.
So I'm going to start doing this, and I'm going to do this isometric. So isometric is relatively easy to work with. We can do a straight line. We can do a 45-degree line. And obviously we can do a vertical line, but isometric kind of lives in the middle of that, where actually what it is going to be like a 60-degree angle line, or a 30-degree angle line in this case. And that is 2 pixels, 1 up, 2 across, 1 up, 2 across, 1 up, 2 across, 1 up. And that's our pixel, like our isometric grid setup is there, right? And that's a pretty standard one. So the railing on that bridge is going to be that. So 2, 2, 2, and there we go. And I could potentially make a pixel brush custom that is 2 by 2, so I don't actually have to draw these bricks, but that's going to be a bit of a pain in the butt if I kind of keep swapping back.
Right.
So now what I need to think about is, I need a little bit of a thickness on that railing, right? Like it needs to be like a block. So I've got one edge. If I come in down here, like that'll work if I zoom out. And if I hide this, like I can see there is a bit of an edge there, but the problem's going to arise later on when I make a corner, right? So like this block kind of like does this. It makes a corner on the ledge of this kind of river over here. There's a bit of a kind of like a ledge railing, right? So if I do that over here, I'm going to run into some potential issues with getting that corner to read the way that I want. So that's not really going to work for me either. So there's a little bit of like, before I can dive into this, I need to have a think about like, how can I best kind of express this? So it's going to be a little bit kind of difficult at first, but I mean, you can get there. And that's okay, but it's a little bit kind of difficult to read. So
right,
I'm going to undo that. There we go. And I'm just going to do that all over again. And because I'm using isometric, one of the cool things with this is I can actually reuse a lot of these assets. So if I just select this now, hold down, press V to get the move tool up, hold down Option, I'll duplicate this guy. And I can just, I don't have to redraw it. I can just kind of take these assets and move them around. So this is what I had before. I'm actually going to bump it down just one. So there's more of a substantial gap in the middle there.
Right.
Yeah. And then I'm just going to make this come up to here. And then I think if I start going the other way, I'll be all right. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. So now I've got a corner that reads a little bit more kind of clearly, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm actually going to knock back that little pixel just because it reads like a pixel at this scale will make a huge difference to how you kind of see things. And having that there makes it actually kind of look like the thing's kind of going in a point. Whereas if I knock that back, your eye kind of reads that a little bit more smoothly as a kind of a corner there. So it's a little bit of cheat, but.
Well, it's interesting because it's kind of like you might think on the outset that it's like quite formulaic because you're talking about, hey, like if you build it this way, you're going to get in these issues. Every pixel matters and everything. But then there's still that, like you can see already how that artistic and the trickery or the optical illusion of the eye starts to come into play. Like when we talk about logo design or typesetting and everything, there's like mathematically correct and then there's optically correct. And they're very often different things.
Totally. And pixel art does that like massively, right? Like I was talking about before, where you have like an eye is represented by a square. Like it's just a square thing in the middle of the face. Like how is that an eye? But your eye kind of looks at this and your brain goes like, that must be the eye, and actually does a lot of work for you in that respect. So knowing how to like fool the brain and the eye to make it see what you want it to see is one of the things I really love about pixel art, actually.
Yeah.
So, all right. So coming back to this, one of the things that you'll notice as well is when I've duplicated this over, I've got this little like ghost pixel here. And that is because my selection tool is set to anti-alias. If you kind of look up here, you can see I've got this anti-alias and it's ticked, right? So I'm going to untick that using my lasso tool. And what it will mean is I won't get this like thing that Photoshop is trying to do, which normally is super helpful and very important, and I want it to do. But here I want it to be like really chunky and not do that. So changing it to anti-aliasing means the selection will be really rough and clean rather than kind of smooth and a bit blurry, which is what I don't want. And then I can just make that edge there.
Nice.
Cool. So that's kind of my scale set now for this piece, is like based on this little corner of this bridge now, I can start building the rest of this piece. And as you can see, like I'm really, really small in my canvas, but it doesn't matter. I can always just kind of come back into this. So now I can start kind of properly thinking about kind of building these elements. So a little tip for you guys, actually. This is one way of building it. Another way of building it is to do kind of this building block approach, which is actually a little bit more standard for isometric. So here's the tip. What you want to do is build yourself a kind of like a Lego brick template for this that you can then kind of duplicate. So I'm going to do this really quickly. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, and there we go. And I'm going to take this. I'm going to flip it upside down, bang, real quick, just placing that in here. There we go. And move that up one. Cool. So now I can have my basis of a square. And I can take this guy down here and take him down to roughly about, oops, sorry. Come on, please cooperate. Cool, done. And then I got 1 block, 2 block, 3. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly fill this in. And again, this is like basically I'm trying to build this kind of like a Lego block. So I'm going to go with a light color for the top, bang. And I'm going to go with a kind of a mid-tone for this side, bang. And I'm going to go with a really kind of a darker tone, but not quite black for that side. So I've made this little cube. And now I can start building this as a kind of like a Lego block and start kind of duplicating it down, right? So I'm going to drag this down and put him here, and then drag that down and put him here. And you can see that literally what I'm doing is kind of like Minecraft.
Yeah.
Like I'm just kind of building this world from these blocks. And so a lot of people will do kind of isometric this way. And as long as I'm duplicating from the back to the front, everything's going to go back in front, right? So if I'm trying to put something like behind these guys, it won't stick there unless I actually like manually drag the layer back behind it, and I can add that kind of back there. But yeah, this is a really kind of handy way to build as well. So kind of whatever floats your boat really is what you want to be doing, and working in this way. You're going to get this like weird like Escher maze kind of thing. Yep. So that's one way to work. What we're doing today is a little bit more kind of organic, and we're just working from not this brick. We're just going to work straight from this guy. Where are we? What are we doing? I should probably save. That's not a bad idea at this stage, now that I've kind of done all of this.
And as a reminder as well, everyone, we are live. So if you have any questions as we're going along, don't hesitate to throw them in chat.
All right, cool. So we're saved now, and I can start thinking about kind of getting a little bit more detail in here. So let's go in with a 2 and a 1 and bang, 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 bang. So we're going to speed things up a little bit. And we're going to start kind of using this little kind of technique to grab a lot of these things and not have to like redraw every single one. So all I'm doing basically is I'm using the move tool and I'm just copying these. They're not going onto separate layers, mostly because I am not duplicating them. I'm just kind of dragging them with the kind of the duplicate tool, if you will.
Right.
And that's just basically it saves me a lot of time. And it's one of the cool things with like this idea of like pixel art is you really can just start to think about like drawing things quite fast if just reusing different assets that you've already created.
Yeah, there's something quite satisfying about that, like reusing an asset and knowing that it's right as well. I quite like it's okay. I spent some time to get this pixel perfect, literally. And then you can grab that and there you've got this diagonal like in your pocket ready to go. You can just copy it and move it over.
Totally. And it's like, it's actually quite helpful for the overall kind of look and feel of the piece as well, right? Where you've got this idea of like everything's nice and symmetrical, everything's the same, everything's built the same way. Now I've got a little bit of an issue here where I've actually placed this in a bad spot because what I've got here, I've got some problem pixels where this bit, whoopsies, sorry, this bit and that bit, you can see I've actually got a pixel overlapping and I've got 3 pixels in a row here. And that's no bueno at all. So no. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to make this into a new layer. And I'm going to drag it so I can move it around. And what I'm trying to have happen is I want it to kind of line up so that there is a nice kind of overlap of pixels and I'm not getting this double kind of cross of pixels happening. And that should do it. It looks weird right now because I haven't erased the ones inside. So that's basically just the other side of my kind of bridge. However, I do need to make sure that that one lines up, and it kind of does. Maybe I need to bring it up one more up to there. That'll do. All I'm trying to do now is basically I'm trying to like line it up so that the ground looks like it's connecting with that one, which it's pretty good. It'll do. I can merge these back together. Okay, so there you go. I've got the basis of this bridge now kind of going. And what I need to kind of think about now is starting to think in kind of like terms of a bit of color, maybe. Because that's going to help me kind of outline things, and it's going to help me kind of build this piece a little bit more as well, right? So for instance, one of the things that might be a little bit kind of tricky here is I don't know, let's say I've got, let's do a window actually. I can explain this a little bit better with a little bit of an idea of like a window, right? So I'm gonna go down. All right, we're doing windows on the building now, jumping a little bit ahead. And we're gonna go to bang and up here. And we might be too short, we might be too long. Let's not kind of worry about that. But effectively, I want a little bit of a ledge in that window as well. Here we go. So we got a kind of like an indent on that window. Now, if I draw like the kind of like the, I don't know what that's called. I'm not a building person.
The window guy.
Yeah. I don't even know what it's called. If I do that, like it might be a little bit too heavy, right? It's a little bit kind of like too present. I can actually start thinking about is the tones and kind of how I'm going to work with that in color. And using color can be really handy to do things that not necessarily an outline, but are still something you need to describe or put in as a shape, right? So what I'm going to kind of start working on is I'm going to create a new kind of little color palette. And this is a good little tip for you guys to kind of think as well as if you're kind of working in your pixel art scale. is any kind of illustration, actually, not just pixel art. This one, you could do this. You could apply it here to anything that you think. If you're kind of working on an illustration and you're a little bit too intermediate, this has a you're going to potentially have a lot of different kind of tones in there. Working in your 4-tone kind of swatch is going to be quite handy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this kind of darker tone, and I want it to be like, let's say, I don't know, like, let's make it like a 10% down here on our kind of black value. Let's go with 10%. So it's not quite black, but it's almost kind of black. But we can always kind of go a little bit darker if we want. Then I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say, I want a 30%. And this is going to be one of our kind of darkest grays. Then I want to go up here, and you can see this pattern here now kind of emerging. We're going in increments of 30. And then we're going to go with 90. So it's a kind of a nice thing to do, because basically we don't have full 100% black, and we also don't have 100% white. So there's always the white of the canvas that can come and help us. So basically we're cheating and we're using 5 tones, but we've actually only made 4.
Yeah.
And so what I can do now is, using this, I can actually come in to here and do this in any one of my tones so that it's still there. It just doesn't read as heavily. It's just not as present as it was. So it doesn't warrant a full-on outline. Yeah.
Cool.
So
I love that. I do this with logo design as well, like at the start, where I'm just trying to get the tones right without bringing in color. And I never ever use 100% white, and I never use 100% black.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And that's like, I think that's one of the really cool things that you can do with this, is kind of working in those kind of ideal tones to try and get this kind of happening. So let me just kind of go forward in time a little bit now. And I'm going to show you guys kind of how then this applies. I will add a little bit of color to this just to kind of showcase how this is going to work. So I'm going to do a little bit of a very, very, very rough cut happening right now, but just to kind of showcase how this all kind of works. So I want to
just before you do this part, we've got a question which I think is a really great question, because it's kind of a little bit unintuitive, I think, if you're familiar with Illustrator. But there's a question called asking, can we do the same type of thing in Adobe Illustrator? So could you answer that? Like, why or why not?
Yes, it's possible, absolutely, to do this in Illustrator. It's just like, I guess, the analogy that I always use is like, if pixel art is like eating soup, bear with me, the thing that will let you eat that soup best is Photoshop, and Photoshop is the spoon. Illustrator is a fork. You could finish your soup bowl with your fork. Like, it's possible. It's just going to take a lot longer. Because what you're going to need to be doing in Illustrator is you're going to need to be making every single pixel is going to need to be a square shape, right? So like, technically you should be able to do it. And then basically you take that shape and you duplicate it and you change its color and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. But that's just going to take so much longer. But it is absolutely possible to do it. One of the things I've not tested, and actually it's a very good question, because you kind of like, I wonder if this would then translate well as a live trace, because there's just vertical and horizontal. The thing is, with pixel art, is if your concern, I guess, about, can I do this in Illustrator so that then it's, infinitely scalable, which is one of the key things with Illustrator. If that's the reason you kind of want to do pixel art in Illustrator, it's kind of a moot point, because there are no curves in pixel art. It's all vertical and horizontal dimensions, right? It's just squares. Everything is made of a square. There's no roundedness happening. And so as a result, pixel art is actually infinitely scalable, even though it is bitmap, which is, I think, it's one of my favorite things about this is like we're going back down so far into the core of what a pixel is
Right.
that it's kind of like quantum wormholed itself back to being infinitely scalable.
This is like if Christopher Nolan like created an art movement,
Totally.
it would be pixel
Yeah.
art because it's so it's so simple
Yeah.
that it can do complicated things.
Yeah. And so like you'll see this, like we probably won't get around to it today, but effectively, like when I save this, I can scale it up to whatever I want. And because there's no curves, Photoshop's not is going to build this properly. So yeah, pixel art is infinitely scalable. So if the goal of like trying to do this in Illustrator is to get that scalability, don't worry about it because you will get that regardless of what it is that you're trying to do.
And if I can just throw this down, because I do know that some people have their favorite apps, right? Like some people have Illustrator installed and they're like, that's my jam. And Photoshop with its scary layers scares me and all that sort of stuff. I get that totally because that was me. I'll just throw in as well that if you're creating something fairly simple, like of course, like Illustrator's awesome. Like if you're creating a logo or iconography, you would do it in Illustrator. I think if you saw the final product of what Jeremy creates during using pixel art, if you tried to replicate that in Illustrator, it will be rife with, I think, issues. Like if you wanted to change the colors or if you want to change, there are definitely ways around it, but it would probably take you longer, particularly if you made a mistake, I think. Whereas I think that the approach that I've seen Jeremy take on pixel art, you would definitely want to be doing it in Photoshop. But it's such a great question, I think.
It is, yeah,
so
because
thanks,
it does go to the core of like what we're doing here today, right? Of like how do you kind of do this because we're using like shapes and squares, like you would think that maybe Illustrator would be good for this. And like I said, it is possible to do this in Illustrator. It's not really the smartest way to do this. But, we always say kind of like, it's not about what's the best program. It's the program that you enjoy or are the most comfortable with. So yeah, if you're happy to be kind of proven wrong of like, hey, I did the same illustration you did in Illustrator and it took me half the time. It's like, fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've kind of started making these volumes here with our tool, and you can kind of see how this then applies as well to different things, right? So I'm using a system here whereby stuff that is like upwards facing gets this tone. Stuff that is kind of facing towards us, so like this bit, that bit, get this tone. Stuff that's kind of facing away from the light, get this tone. So this, that, this thing, all of these kind of bits are getting that, right? And it comes back to our kind of cube that we did a little bit earlier, where we had this kind of like these three tones that were happening on that cube, showed us where the volumes are going to come from. And it's a really good way to like very basically showcase your tones and volumes using something simple. I've done this very, very roughly to kind of bring it back. But the cool thing with this is once that's done, I can come in and add a gradient map to this. And what the gradient map's going to do is it's going to allow me to apply colors to this very, very quickly in an interesting way. All right.
Okay.
So because I've got these tones, and what a gradient map will do effectively, if I swap back this to black and white, you'll see it's a little bit darker. But what it's doing is it's basically mapping anything that's black will be a certain color. Anything that's white will be a certain color, right? So in this tone here, I don't actually have any black. So that's why it's kind of trying to make this a little bit darker. But if I click on this black and say, all right, cool. Instead of everything that's black, you should be black. Let's say that everything that's black will be this kind of deep indigo kind of color. So now it's kind of doing this scale. Now I want to go to the other side and say anything that's light, I want to say make it yellow. And so there we go. Now I can add a separate one, right? Anything that's kind of like 50% gray in the middle, this is going to be real wacky, but let's give it a shot, will be this kind of like bright pink. And so you can see this happening on my little kind of volumetric cube that I created up here. I need to okay that before I can move. There we go. You can see this happening now on this, right? Like the darker tones are that purple, the mid tones are the pink, and the light tones are the yellow.
Yeah.
Right. So if I change this yellow to like a light blue, it'll change that to that color as well. So it's a really cool way of adding color very quickly without having to do it as you're going, without having to think about it. So it's just a simplification tool for you. So what I would do when I'm doing this, and something that's kind of tricky and like intimidating color-wise, is I would go in and just work in these 4 tones, real simple and easy. And because we're working with pixel art, anything that's kind of lo-fi and budget will thematically work, right? Because that's the point. Pixel art is to kind of reduce the strain on the rendering power of whatever machine you're playing a video game on. And so working with just limited amount of tones means you're going to get a kind of a cool result. And I don't want it to be realistic. I don't necessarily want the trees to be green and the trunks to be brown and the building to be kind of like beige. And, you know, I don't necessarily, I'm not looking for accuracy here. I'm doing an illustration. It can be a bit more creative, it can be a bit more stylized. So working with that, I can then kind of very quickly, as you saw, kind of change those when I'm finished with all my volumes and anything. But working in this kind of grayscale means a much easier time with kind of blocking out volumes and getting those shadows and tones going. And then I can kind of tweak it a little bit later on. So that's the main kind of color thing here.
Yeah, it's really cool.
And I just wanted, I wanted to just jump ahead and kind of showcase that, so that when we kind of have a little bit more kind of a detailed thing happening, it's just a little bit more apparent what's going on.
Cool.
And so I can kind of start. One of the things that you'll notice as well is normally at the moment, I've got everything on the same layer, right? Like normally my process would be to have an outline and then colors underneath that. And that's a pretty standard kind of process. But again, one of the cool things with pixel art is I can do this kind of shape. And if I use the paint bucket tool, which sometimes in Photoshop can leave a little bit of a trail of pixels on the edge, because what Photoshop's doing is it's kind of smoothing regular brush tools. If I'm using pixel art and just my pencil brush, I can come in with my bucket tool and it fills that perfectly because I'm working on the same layer. So actually there's an interest for me to do the opposite of what I would normally do when I'm working with pixel art, which is to just have everything on the same layer.
Yeah.
The other thing that's really cool with this is if I use the magic wand, and I got to make sure again on all my selection tools, except for the square selection tool, because that's already a square, I need to untick all these anti-aliases. What I can do, I'll show you actually very quickly before we wrap. I'll show you what it does if I don't have it unticked. If I duplicate this and move it, you'll see there's all these ghost pixels around it because Photoshop's trying to like make it perceptually smoother.
Right.
So if I undo that and I untick this and make that same thing, you can see it's nice and clear cut. It's a nice, crunchy, crisp pixel edge. So that's why you're basically trying to get this idea of like anti-alias everything. But coming back to this, I could just make a selection of this purple and I can change the tone of it like very quickly as if it was on a separate layer. So one of the point of layers in pixel art kind of is like hugely diminished. And the benefit that layers bring when you do pixel art, obviously you still have them, as you'll see. I'll have a ton of layers by the time this is finished. But But one of the points of having something on a separate layer is it's easily accessible and selectable. Whereas with pixel art, you can do it all on the same layer, and it's just as easily selectable.
Yeah.
So there's not as much of a worry of like, well, but what if you want to edit it later on? It's like, cool, I can do that. It's all on the same layer.
Nice. I love that.
Yeah.
Again, it's like kind of those counterintuitive things that, like, if it's not explained or you've not really think about it, like, of course, one of the most powerful things of Photoshop is layers.
Totally.
And you know, anti-aliasing, and like being able to do something that has a gradient that looks very natural, like, you know, a photo, or maybe you're painting hair in on a different layer because you're trying to get it to look realistic, so you're really in, you know, all that sort of stuff. And then you can, by having it on another layer, you can add gradient maps and different overlays to make it look very natural. And you sort of flip all that on its head, really, when you're doing pixel art in Photoshop.
Yeah. It really, like, pixel art it's like I said, it's like the quantum mechanics of like Photoshop. It's just like everything is nothing and everything at the same time, simultaneously in multiple planes of existence. And it just like, it's funny to work with. But with that experience, you just like, the more you do it, the more experience you'll get in it, and the more you'll understand, like, this is how this thing behaves, and this is what it's doing, and this is like what I should be trying to do with this particular kind of way of working. And actually, like, once you kind of get a good grasp on that, it becomes super powerful. And super fun to work with, because you can throw away a lot of these kind of things that are imposed on us by working in Photoshop. Things like scalability, things like having, you know, non-destructive workflow where all your layers need to be kind of set out in a way that you're going to be able to make quick edits for your client if you're working on a client brief and so on. Like, so yeah, there's a lot there that's just kind of like, I don't need to do this anymore.
Yeah.
Take that, Photoshop. So you can see now, basically, like, this is not going to take me a long time from here to have like the core elements of what it is that I'm trying to do. What's going on here? Why are you being a bit of a pain? There we go. To start kind of like building it. What's going on? Come on.
Wants to get everything.
I don't know. Yeah, it doesn't want to merge. There we go.
There we go.
So like, like I can have this kind of like building block that I've created quite quickly, just from kind of making these like rough selections and just duplicating them.
I always do that. It's like the USB thing, right?
Yeah.
Like flip
Yeah,
vertical.
exactly.
Nope,
yeah.
That's not what I wanted. I wanted the other one.
Because I think it might be flipped in Illustrator.
Huh?
I think there's one of the things that, like, one of the programs does this thing where vertical is horizontal and horizontal is vertical, and it's like,
really?
it's
Okay, I'll look
confusing.
into that. That might be.
I could be wrong.
Yeah.
I have known to be wrong in the past about some
I always
stuff.
get it with like y-axis and x-axis as well. I'm like, I know what the x and y-axis is, but sometimes the toggle, like the interface, is not quite exactly the same.
Yeah.
Hey, we've just got a minute left, so I'll wrap up for us as you're going along. So Jeremy will be back. If you want to watch part 1 of this as well, where Jeremy has created the sketch, which is on the left-hand side, which is the first step in pixel art. We'll share that in chat as we're going along. You can also go and check it out on YouTube, is the best place to check it out, and subscribe to the channel. You can find all of our Asia Pacific streams there. Stick around. We'll be back in 15 minutes with Illustrator Dale Bagini, a friend of both of ours, Jeremy and mine. I'm very excited to have him back on for the year, which would be great. And he'll be tackling the same brief. And it's going to be really fun. But thank you, Jeremy. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, we'll see you soon.
We've got to wrap up before we get cut off. See you, everyone. Bye, Jeremy.
Bye.